After you've upgraded your domain controllers in your environment to Windows Server 2003, you need to go in and perform a couple more tasks in order to enable all of the advanced features that Windows Server 2003 Active Directory brings to the table. We've got what are known as functional levels now with Windows Server 2003, and you need to understand the different functional levels, when you can use them, and when you should change them. Many of these new features in Windows Server 2003 rely on what are known as functional levels. Now, an Active Directory functional level basically states what level of support your version of Active Directory, your particular Active Directory, is running at. One thing that you need to remember is that a domain can be made up of a mix of different servers, a mix of different domain controllers. You can be running Windows NT Server 4.0 as a backup domain controller, mind you, not as a primary domain controller. The process of introducing Active Directory into a Windows NT 4 environment basically takes away the role of a primary domain controller and gives it to 2000, or in this case, Windows Server 2003. But you can still have Windows NT Server 4.0 as a backup domain controller if necessary. Of course, you can be running Windows 2000 Server and Windows Server 2003. In order to support these different versions of Windows, these different capability levels, if you will, Microsoft with Windows 2000 introduced what they called mixed mode and native mode. Mixed mode is if you had Windows 2000 domain controllers and NT4 backup domain controllers. Native mode was pure 2000 across the board. Similarly, 2003 now introduces functional levels because we've added another layer of complexity to it. Not only do we have to worry about NT4 and 2000, but we also have to worry about Server 2003 and what it brings to the table. So let's begin by looking at what are known as domain functional levels. Domain functionality affects one domain and one domain only. Remember, if you're running an Active Directory forest, you're going to have several domains in your environment. You could have an entire tree with parent and child domains, or you could have separate trees. In any case, you can have domains throughout your forest running at different domain functional levels. That's just fine. That simply means that one domain is going to have capabilities as far as Active Directory is concerned that another domain does not. Now, the different domain functional levels that we can run at include Windows 2000 Mixed. This is the default. Even if you install a brand new, out-of-the-box Windows Server 2003 computer, it's going to be running at Windows 2000 Mixed functional level. This supports Windows NT 4.0, 2000, and 2003. This is kind of the catch-all. This gives you the best compatibility across the board for Windows products. That's why Microsoft makes this the default. It's the lowest common denominator. Now, if you don't have any Windows NT 4 backup domain controllers in your environment, you're probably already running at Windows 2000 native functional level. What this supports, of course, is Windows 2000 and now Windows Server 2003 as well. There's a special one here known as Windows Server 2003 Interim. This particular functional level is only available during an upgrade from Windows NT 4, and it only supports Windows NT 4 and Windows Server 2003. You cannot have any domain controllers running Windows 2000 here. So you can see this one is really meant for those organizations who are finally moving out of the NT4 world and into an Active Directory environment utilizing Windows Server 2003. The interim functionality level here for a domain doesn't give you anything. You're still running with all enhanced features turned off. But at a forest level, you do have some enhanced features as far as replication is concerned. And then finally, the nirvana that you're trying to get to is the Windows Server 2003 functional level. This means that you have nothing older in your environment as far as domain controllers are concerned. I really want to stress that. This only relates to domain controllers. Your client computers, your member servers, I don't care what they're running. They can be DOS or Windows 3 for all I care. But your domain controllers, if you plan to be at the functional level of Windows Server 2003, all of your domain controllers must be running Windows Server 2003. So what do we get? Why do we care about our domain functionality? Well, let's take a look at what we get if we're running Windows 2000 native as our functional level. At that point, we basically are in a good old Windows 2000 Active Directory environment. We have the ability to use universal groups, which allow us to bring together different groups from different domains throughout our entire forest. We can do group nesting. Group nesting was a new feature with Windows 2000 that we could not do in Windows NT 4. We can convert groups from one type to another type. We can go from global to universal, domain local to universal, whatever the case may be, and we have a SID history. If we need to convert users or migrate users from one environment to another, we can utilize an attribute known as the SID history to try to keep track of them as they move through our environment. All of these features, as the domain functionality level states, are available with Windows 2000. So if you're in a current Windows 2000 environment and you leave your domains at Windows 2000 native functionality, you aren't going to gain any new features that Windows Server 2003 introduces. In order to get those new features, you must bump up to Windows Server 2003 functionality, which means that all of your domain controllers have been upgraded. Remember, this bump up, this change in functionality level is not an automatic process. You need to go in and do it. So what do we get by moving up to Windows Server 2003 functionality for our domain? One of the biggies, we now get the ability to rename domain controllers. A lot of people really wanted this in Windows 2000. For whatever reason, they don't like the names of their servers, they need to restructure. Whatever the case might be, you wanted the ability to rename your domain controller. Windows Server 2003 functionality for your domain gives you that capability. The ability to track a logon timestamp. Windows Server 2003 domain functionality gives you this capability. The logon timestamp will be updated so you can see the last time a user logged into the environment. It's a great attribute that you can tie into a lot of different processes throughout your entire network. And also, Microsoft has introduced the inet.org person object. This is an LDAP compatible user object, and if we're running a Windows Server 2003 functionality, we can actually use the user password attribute of the inet.org person as the password to log on to the environment. So it gives us better compatibility with different LDAP directories by running at this particular level. So remember, you want to get to this domain functionality level. If you're running in mixed mode, you don't get any of these. None of these work because you're basically at the least common denominator. You move up to 2000 native, you get some of them. You move to Windows Server 2003, you get the rest of them.